We also offer specific audits around with a technical orientation, technical audits, social audits, as I mentioned, environmental audits, chemical management audits, Chrome 6 management audits, and fault diagnosis, assessment and support as well. Next slide, please, Georgina. And within the team and the organisation, we have a sustainability consulting function. And that is the orientation, really, of the services that we are going to talk about over the next year in these quarterly sustainability webinars. So as an organisation, we offer support around sustainability strategies. We offer environmental audits and support, social audits, supply chain mapping, which we're going to talk about today. We also have chemical management services under our ChemMap banner, as well as traceability support around cotton, traceability, organic cotton, and of course, more recently, testing and support around the topic of microplastics, which is a growing concern for many people around the world. Next slide, please. We also offer training through the Softlines Leather division with some special orientation around leather, particularly leather courses. We do leather courses online. We do a short one-day course, which is an introduction to leather. We do a chemical management training course online. We do a Chrome 6 management training course online. We do a leather sustainability course online as well. And we do webinars such as this and other seminars online as well. All of those webinars are available in sort of modular fashion, so you can watch them at your leisure in bite-sized pieces. Next slide, please. Yeah, I've touched on the chemical certifications. We've developed a product called ChemMap, which is now firmly established in the marketplace. It is a product portfolio that focuses on chemical management and certification and verification. So we offer validation and certification against ZDHC, Gateway and MRSL compliance. We do chemical management audits for leather manufacturers and textile manufacturers. We can support brands where on their policies around chemical management, benchmark against their peers, and develop appropriate chemical management policies, etc. And a new product that has been launched this year, at the end of last year, has been very popular, is the certification of vegan materials as well. So this is a DNA and due diligence-based assessment around the content of materials claiming to be vegan. So this is now being associated with the Vegan Society in the UK, so additional certification is available through that. Next slide, please. Just to give you some idea of coverage, it is one of the smaller divisions within the Eurofins group, but we do have coverage in Asia, China, Vietnam, India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Turkey, Italy, Germany, UK, Spain, and some presence in the US as well through our US office, which is our partner in this particular presentation series over the next year. Next slide, please. And that's really that's just really it. A quick introduction to Eurofins PLC before Eurofins Softlines Leather. Apologies. Before we go into the main presentations, there are some useful contacts here. Our representative in the US, Lizette, and our sustainability lead, who is giving the next presentation, will be available if people want to talk about specific products and services. So if I can now introduce our first speaker again, which is Peter Hughes. We'll just hand over to him so he can manage his presentations. But Peter is our sustainability lead at Eurofins PLC, and he's going to talk to you about supply chain mapping and some overviews on sustainability. So over to you, Peter.
Thanks, Adam. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining this webinar. So this presentation is going to cover a brief overview of defining sustainability, and then move into drivers for traceability, the leather supply chain, some sustainability challenges within the leather supply chain, and finally, we're going to conclude with our traceability solution and how that can be used and how it can drive benefits within your business. So when starting to look at this question of sustainability and how traceability fits within that wider consideration, it's very important that as an organisation, you define what the word sustainable means for you. It's fair to say that this word is used a lot in business, and it's also fair to say there are multiple different interpretations of it. In fact, there's probably multiple different interpretations within your own organisation, unless you've done an active process for defining it for yourself. Just to give you an indication of this, this definition is a perfectly reasonable definition of sustainability, something to be able to be maintained at a certain rate or level. It doesn't have any kind of ethical or environmental connotations associated with it. Some people believe this to be the meaning. It will often not be the meaning because many people associate a wider interpretation. For example, conserving an ecological balance by avoiding depletion of natural resources. Well, this is a very environmentally focused definition of sustainability and one that increasingly is becoming understood. You'll also hear it just being upheld as defended as good practice. Oh, it must be good because it's sustainable, you know, without really defining what that means. And you'll hear that a lot in industry. I think the best definition is something that goes along the lines of this, something that enhances social capital through the balanced use of economic capital without depleting environmental capital. What that does is it brings together the three pillars of sustainability around social implications, environmental impacts, and economic considerations. And really from a business perspective, I believe this is the most comprehensive definition of sustainability. But as I say, the most important thing to do as a starting point is to start understanding what definition of sustainability is right for your organization and then starting to implement it as a result. So it's also fair to say that sustainable thinking is no longer a peripheral attitude. It is actually becoming well recognized as simply good business. Increasingly, sustainability is how well-operated organizations work. And by integrating it effectively, you can add commercial value and brand differentiation within your organization. Telling an authentic message, though, is absolutely key in sustainable reporting. It's if you make a message which isn't authentic or isn't somehow not true, then it's definitely a risky approach. So we would always recommend making sure that whatever you publicly say around sustainability, you can back up with measurable claims. And I think with sustainable organizations, those who understand sustainability and their proper impacts have recognized that the majority of their impact is actually within their material supply chain and the end of life of their products. So organizations should and can look at their immediate impacts, as in, you know, their stores, if they have stores, or their operations that they are in control of. But really, it's how their product and how they can influence their product upstream and downstream of their immediate operations is really where the greatest sustainability impacts and improvements can be found. And without understanding where your supply chain exists and where your materials are being originating from, it's very, very challenging to understand what this impact is. And really, that's where traceability starts to come in, because if you have a good system of understanding the route of supply of your materials, how your materials are made, where they're made, who's making them, who's involved in that process, then you can be in a good place to start understanding what the potential risks might be and also starting to respond to those risks in an effective way. And this is really what this presentation is going to look at in a bit more detail. It's great to see so many of you on the call today, and I think it's an indication and reflection of how much traceability is currently in the general consciousness. And the reason for this is multifaceted, but there are certainly several distinct drivers that are really bringing people to come and understand the importance of traceability. One of those is growing awareness of environmental and social challenges. This presentation here, we're going to talk specifically about leather and the leather material and the challenges associated with leather. But traceability challenges and environmental challenges are true for all materials. increasingly also social challenges. So, you know, as I say, this is focusing on leather, but if you use cotton in your supply chain, you'll, I'm sure, be considering the social implications of the cotton supply chain right now, because that is a very, very on-point topic. So these large-scale international environmental and social challenges are starting to drive people towards looking to understand their the traceability of their materials better. Also, if you're looking to get investment within a business, investors are increasingly asking for evidence of good traceability systems to ensure that what they're investing in has a sustainable future. And so having a good traceability system, understanding where your materials come from, is often a question now around successfully achieving new investment. New legislation is coming in online all the time. There's new legislation appearing in Europe right now that is demanding organizations to have a better control of their supply chains. And the only real way to do that initially is through effective traceability. You'll also find, depending on where you sit within who your customers are, if you are supplying to business customers, they may well have their own traceability demands. In fact, you may be on this call because you're getting asked questions by your customer around how you're supplying or sourcing materials. So that is a particular driver right now. And to a certain extent, even consumers are starting to ask these questions as well, although that is probably limited to a small number, but those can be a vocal number, that small number, and awareness within consumers of particularly the environmental and social challenges is growing. And also industry programs. So for example, I've got that textile exchange, but other industry programs and certification programs within the materials sector are increasingly requiring an effective traceability system as part of achieving a certification. So all these different drivers are pushing people to start looking at understanding what their supply chain looks like and to start integrating traceability. And an effective form of traceability can form the basis of a strategic response to managing risk within your supply chain. So as I said, we were going to look at leather in this presentation. As I say, all materials have their own unique challenges within their supply chain. So it would be too big a presentation to go into different materials today, but this is the leather one, although there are obviously other solutions, other ways of understanding the material supply chain for other materials, but leather as an example. So this is a sort of an overview of how the leather industry works in general. Big drivers of the leather raw material, so this is the raw hide in the case of bovine, are countries such as South America, Brazil, Argentina, United States, Australia. That material will often be semi-processed before being shipped to Asia, where it will undergo leather manufacturing processing. That might be finished in Asia. It might also be moved to Italy for finishing before being further transported into actual product manufacture. And the reason why I'm explaining this is what you can see is the flow of materials for the leather supply chain. First of all, is a global flow. All countries in the world have a livestock industry. And as leather is a byproduct of the livestock industry, all countries in the world potentially could be the source of raw material for your leather products. But secondly, what we're saying here is there is a significant amount of flow between the processing steps. And I think a good example of this is the Italy leather industry. So the Italian leather industry is one of the most established leather industries globally. It has a brand reputation all of its own. But if you look at the Italian livestock herd, it could only service a maximum of 10% of the leather industry within Italy. What that means is at least 90% of leather produced in Italy originates in its raw form outside of Italy. And so what we would like to say to organizations who are buying leather products is that it is unlikely that the leather product you're buying, the raw material originates in the country that you're buying that product from. And without doing some kind of traceability exercise, it will be challenging for you to understand really where that material is originating, and therefore how you understand how to start managing the challenges potentially associated with it. To give you an idea of scale, these are the real results of a supply chain that we mapped for a major footwear retailer. So they had 40 tier 1 leather suppliers within their supply chain that they were sourcing their material from. Those leather suppliers were in turn sourcing from 160 tanneries who were sourcing from 480 different slaughterhouses. Now, those slaughterhouses, we estimated, were sourcing from up to 1.2 million Tier 4 farms. Now, those Tier 4 farms, they may be finishing farms, they may be indirect farms, but a significant number of farms within that supply chain, with the potential footprint of up to 24 million cattle. Now, we're not saying that every single one of those animals was in that footwear brand's supply chain, but the potential impact of that footwear brand was of this kind of scale. And what this shows you is the number of organizations, the complexity of your supply chain grows the higher up you go away from your organization. This is a schematic of how the leather industry works. So over on the right-hand side is probably where a lot of you sit. So brand and retail, or potentially product manufacturing space. And you'll have a good idea of who you are sourcing from, as they are your direct suppliers. You may have some understanding of the leather suppliers behind those, the finishing leather suppliers. You may source directly from those finishing leather suppliers. Those finishing leather suppliers may in turn have a good grasp of the semi-processing behind that. But as you can see, the leather manufacturing stage is multi-stepped. Some organizations take leather all the way from the rawhide through to the finished leather. But you can have every single step in between, and you can have multiple different organizations within that space. And due to the fact there are multiple potential different organizations there, they are all potential additional steps within your supply chain. Beyond that, you have the slaughterhouse, which is really where the raw material for leather originates as the byproduct of the livestock industry. And beyond that, you get into the farming stage, so the livestock industry. And you can have fattening farms, which are farms which supply directly to the slaughterhouse. That's where the slaughterhouse is servicing. But behind that, you potentially might have multiple different smaller fattening and carving farms, which are bringing the animals to the right slaughter weights in order to be moved to the slaughterhouse. And what we would say is, at present, the target for most organizations doing a traceability exercise for the leather industry should be trying to get back to that slaughterhouse level. It is sometimes possible to get beyond that if there are good in-country systems for the livestock, for traceability of livestock. But it is challenging, primarily due to the fact that leather is a byproduct of the livestock industry, and often any traceability which exists within the animal, the live animal, travels then with the value product of the animal, which is the meat or the dairy. It doesn't tend to travel with the hide, and that is a challenge for the leather industry right now. But regardless, getting back to that slaughterhouse level is a really good achievement, and you can make a lot of progress in terms of managing the potential risks and get a better understanding of your supply chain by identifying the locations of those slaughterhouses within your supply chain. So I mentioned we would look a little bit briefly at some of the sensitivities and challenges for leather as a material, and I'm not going to dwell on this in any great detail, but just to give you an idea of why it's important to look up the supply chain and what the potential challenges that are maybe outside of your immediate or direct control, but are ultimately something that you need to be aware of and need to start to maintain usage of leather in your portfolio. These are sort of the key environmental and social challenges for leather. So first of all, you have the carbon footprint of the material. Leather is a byproduct of the meat industry. The meat industry is a carbon intensive industry. So understanding what the right allocation of that carbon footprint of the livestock is on the leather is an important determination for understanding where leather sits within your product portfolio. And there are various different interpretations of that, but having some understanding of that is important. And knowing where your materials come from will also have an impact in understanding what your carbon footprint could be. Deforestation is a key driver towards traceability for the leather industry right now. Deforestation does occur as a result of illegal cattle herding in parts of the world, and it is a potential challenge for the leather industry, and one that our tool particularly, we are looking into helping our clients understand what their potential risk is for potential for deforestation or material from a deforested area entering into their supply chain. Excuse me. Leather is a unique material relative to a lot of the other materials that it's in the competitive space with, in that it's an animal-based material, and therefore the welfare of the animal is a crucial question for how an organization or a brand is able to sell a leather material confidently, and understanding where that leather comes from in its raw material state, as in the live animal, is very important for understanding the potential animal welfare challenges within your supply chain. The value of hide fluctuates dramatically. Again, leather is a byproduct of another industry, so the volume of available material isn't dependent on the demand of the leather industry. It's dependent on the amount of demand for meat. So due to that, the value of the hides change, and that's unusual compared to a lot of other materials. Most other materials have a relative consistent price, whereas leather, the price of leather does change over time, and that can be a challenging thing to manage from an economic perspective. If you use exotics in your supply chain, these have their own challenges associated with them because they're not byproducts. So by exotics, I mean things like alligator or snake skin. These are materials which are farmed predominantly for their leather, for their skin. And so there's a different set of challenges associated with those materials. Then we start to move into the actual manufacturing side of the leather industry. So you've got producing leather is a chemically intensive process. And understanding how the chemistry in and chemistry out is managed through chemical management, effluent treatment, is important to understand how well that leather is being made from an environmental perspective. And engaging with organizations such as the Leather Working Group within your manufacturing base is a great way of controlling that. Leather is produced in regions which do have modern slavery challenges. We're not saying that modern slavery is within your leather supply chain, but there is a potential risk for that, as with many different manufacturing industries. And NGOs are helping the wider population, consumers, become more aware of these issues, which is again putting pressure on the industry to respond effectively to some of these challenges. We also have the factor around worker environment, which is linked to the manufacturing stage. As opposed to the environmental perspective, it's the social perspective. So are the employees within your manufacturing supply chain being treated in an ethical manner? And then finally, you get to the other end of it. So you're looking at the waste management. What happens to the waste that's produced in your supply chain? What happens to the waste, particularly at the end of life of your product? These are the sort of questions that without understanding where your materials come from, it's hard to understand what the potential risk footprint you have. And finally, we have the fact that there are alternative materials to leather coming onto the market regularly. And these alternative materials are putting pressure on the leather industry to improve its environmental and social performance, which is a positive thing for the industry in the sense that it's helping to look at these issues and bring these issues to the forefront. So what we would say is to help you understand and manage those issues, the first thing you should do is map. Once you've mapped your supply chain, you can know what it looks like. Once you know what it looks like, you can understand it. And by understanding it, you can respond effectively with an effective risk management plan. So this is how our product works. So our traceability product, we've developed this product over 5 years now. We've well established now in the industry. We recognize using our expertise as material specialists, we're able to bring that to bear on the understanding of the traceability of the materials. And we believe that makes us a good partner for you. We also recognize that most organizations, traceability isn't a core activity of what you do, whereas we do understand traceability, so we can help jump you to a solution quickly that could potentially take a significant amount of time and internal capacity if you try and do it yourselves completely. We work in a collaborative space, so we would like to work to understand what is the objectives that you're trying to understand, what are the particular focus areas, is it environmental challenges, are you looking from a commercial perspective, what's the driver behind looking at traceability for you? We develop a questionnaire which asks the right questions for you and also the right questions of the industry to understand who the actors are within your supply chain. Our questionnaire is an online tool, and one of the advantages of that means that, first of all, it's very easy to complete by the suppliers. It also means that it produces quality data that we can compare. And we're able to track live as those responses come back in, so we can see which parts of your supply chain are engaging and which potentially might need a bit of support. We always ask our clients to distribute that questionnaire through an effective form of engagement that we can support with. But you are the customer at the end of the day of those suppliers, and therefore you have the influence. When we receive the data, we do a validity check on it. We check to make sure that it makes sense. We check to see any Leather Working Group status on there. We then build a supply chain map, which pulls all of this data into a very usable, easy to understand space. And we do some analysis on top of that, our data analysis and our risk assessment. And then finally, we hand that over to you in a form of a interactive presentation. And we encourage you to involve as many stakeholders within that presentation as possible, as this is information share. And the more information you're able to share from it, the more effective you can use this, more effectively you can use this information within your business. It can take up to 6 months to do a project like this. It's not a quick exercise, but we say it's important to understand that it's a relatively, it takes a few weeks, few months to do it properly. But that information is very valuable once you've produced it. To give you an indication of what a supply chain map can look like, this is a very, very high level indication. So in most cases, we would expect a far more populated map than this. In fact, if you were to do 10 of your tier 1 suppliers, we would often expect to see upwards of 200 different organizations identified as a result of that kind of exercise, and with multiple different connections within those 200. But what you can see here from this screenshot, this is an interactive tool. This is just a screenshot here, but we have an interactive tool. It shows that the supplier located in this case in the UK is sourcing from 2 key suppliers are located in red on this map, one in Europe and one in Asia. The European supplier is sourcing wet blue, also from Europe, who are then in turn sourcing their raw material predominantly from Europe and also from North Africa. The Asia supplier is located in terms of its processing, partly in Asia, but also predominantly in South America with a big footprint in Brazil. And that organization is also sourcing multiple different raw material sources within Brazil. So what we can do is we can then start to add a layer of analysis onto this. I mentioned that deforestation was a particular challenge within the leather industry. And what we do is we can add different layers of data on top of the data, layers of data on top of your supplier information once we understand where your suppliers are located. So in this case, what we've done is we've taken a slaughterhouse here. We have overlaid deforestation data by municipality within Brazil. And what that does is it tells us for each municipality the amount of deforestation in hectares and percentage forest loss that has occurred over the last 20 years. And what we can do is we can then feed that data in by adding a 100-kilometer radius around that slaughterhouse, which is an estimate of the likely distance that finishing farms will be transporting animals to service that slaughterhouse. And what that means, we can start to build a picture of the type of farms that slaughterhouse will be sourcing from, and therefore the type of material that could be entering into your supply chain. And by doing this kind of data analysis, we can start to pull together a list of suppliers that are potentially of higher risk. And as a result of that, organizations can go back through their supply chain and start to ask further questions. For example, what policies do these suppliers have in place, or these slaughterhouses have in place, to ensure that they're not sourcing from animals farmed within newly deforested areas, and how those policies, evidence that those policies are being met. So in conclusion then, by undertaking supply chain mapping and traceability, you can increase the visibility of your supply chain and better manage your supply chain, better manage risk. Our product produces data for your supply chain. We use our expert risk analysis to help you understand what that data means. And as a result of that, you can be more informed, make more informed decisions, respond to scrutiny, be able to respond to questions from a position of knowledge, and start to make informed decisions going forward as to how your supply chain should work in the future, where your areas of risk are. You can also get additional commercial benefits, for example, improvements to standardization, quality control, price negotiation, rationalization. There's multiple different potential benefits. Really, I think the important thing to take away from traceability, though, is it is a journey. When you start doing this, you start looking at it, you do need to maintain it. You also, as an organization, need to understand what the traceability information means to you before you can respond to it. Okay, so that's the conclusion of my presentation. I'm now going to hand you over to Fernando, who's going to take us through his next presentation. So, Fernando, I'll hand it over to you, and I'm going to stop sharing. Fernando, can you confirm that you're now the host?
Peter, yes, I'm just sharing my screen now. Just give me 1 second. And yes.
Yeah, we can see that. Thank you, Fernando. That's great.
Excellent. Very good. So thank you, Peter, for this nice presentation. I also thanks the BLC team for organizing, to putting this webinar together, and for everybody attending for putting this time aside to listen to us. The idea here is to share a recent project we've developed. We run an LCA life cycle assessment of our leathers, and we believe this is a very important project, not only for PRIMEASIA, but also to the way people see leather and discuss about the impact of leather. So we thought it was important to share with this group. Before we get to the project itself, it's important for us to cover some basic concepts about what a LCA is and why we decided to go that path. When we talk about life cycle assessment, currently this is one of the most reliable methods for environmental impact assessment. So it helps us to understand where those impacts are in different stages of the life of a product. But it also helps us, it allows us to identify the hotspots, so we can not only see what are the major impacts in our supply chain, in our processing stage, but we can understand where they are. By having those more accurate information, we are also able to address them more efficiently. So we see also LCA as an important management tool, environmental management tool, that help us to make sure we are going in the right direction when we are looking at achieving our corporate sustainability goals. Not only that, we also think this is very important because there's a lot of discussions about the impact of leather. Can leather be made sustainably? And if we don't have the enough data, it's hard to answer those questions. And that's what we've been doing with this project, is to have scientific-based, reliable data that we can use in those discussions. It's important also that we mentioned the company we partnered with to run this project. And the reason for that is that LCAs, they are very precise, they are very detailed in terms of assessing impact, but also if you don't know what you're measuring, you don't know how to measure it properly. So we looked for a company. We've partnered with Spin 360, that is a company that has been working with LCAs, and more specifically LCAs in the leather, in the luxury, in the footwear sectors for more than 10 years. Because that gives them a critical view of our sector, the workflows, the waste streams, and by doing that, we are more accurate in measuring our impacts. Not only that, we thought it was also important to look for an organization that is working with different companies, different multi-stakeholder organizations around the world. And this Federico Brugnoli, who is the director of this company, he also helped to write the product environmental footprint category rules in Europe for leather. So he has a very in-depth understanding of the methodologies and the standards accepted to run a LCA, which adds credibility to any information when we follow those standards. Now, going into more details about our life cycle assessment, I think it's important to give an overview and to show some details of the scope, the length of this project. First, it's important also to mention that this life cycle assessment was performed following the ISO 14040 and 14044. It also followed the main product category rules in Europe, so they are in line with the most credible, most recognized international standards for life cycle assessment. And when we talk about the things we covered, what we assessed in this LCA, I believe we can comfortably say that this is probably the most comprehensive life cycle assessment that has ever been done in our industry. And the reason I'm saying that is because we covered 3 different raw materials. So we assessed raw materials from Australia, Brazil, and the US. We also looked at 6 different retaining formulations and 6 different finishings in leather. Not only that, when we are talking about collecting primary data, so not rely on generic information, assumptions. We collect the primary data from 3 different slaughterhouses, 3 wet blue tanneries. We assessed our 2 retention and finishing facilities in China and Vietnam, and we covered 5 countries in total. So it gives a pretty good overview of the leather industry by assessing those aspects. Not only that, we covered around 56 machines in this process. We evaluated more than 206 process phases in the leather processing, and we collected more than 3,000 data points. The LCA covered things such as raw materials, so the impact of the animal raising, slaughtering, all the leather processing, and also the transportation of hides and leathers between different tanneries. It does not cover the transportation of the finished product to footwear factories. It doesn't cover footwear manufacturing nor end of life. Just to give an idea of how many of the amount of data covered in this project, when you consider all the different environmental aspects covered, the different areas of the supply chain we researched, the environmental indicators we selected, and the amount of products covered, we ended up with more than 27,000 indicators. So it's a pretty detailed research, and that gives us a lot of data, a lot of thoughts that we can use in managing our impacts. And talking about all those indicators, categories, it's first one point that it's good to share is that when we were starting this project, we thought it was important to cover a range of indicators that would help us to not only have that information with us and use in our internal discussions, but something that would follow the main standards that we could report with HIG, that we could report following the environmental product declarations. So we covered 14 different indicators in this research. So it gives us a lot of different indicators around the environmental impacts. Normally you see people talking about global warming as the main thing, water usage, but here we are talking about 14 different impacts that were covered in this research. For this presentation today, we're going to be talking about 4 specifically. These are the ones that are more popular, that people talk more often, just to make the presentation a bit easier to share with you. But we need to keep in mind that in total, we are talking about 14 different indicators evaluated in this life cycle assessment. Now, talking about our findings, I believe the main thing here is not to think about a number, but to think about an approach. What LCA allow us to do, how we can use that information, and this is what we want to share with you. One of the views we can see when we start evaluating life cycle assessment, we are able to understand our impacts separated between raw materials, so what comes from the life of the animal and what comes from the core processes. And when I talk about core processes here, I'm talking about everything from bean housing to finished leather. And these are just some examples. So when you talk about global warming potential here, we could identify that 53% of the global warming potential comes from the raw material, and 46% comes from the core processes. So we need to work on those 46% to find ways to further reduce. When you talk about eutrophication, it's completely different. You have 85% of the impact coming from raw materials. So it's far from our operations, and it doesn't make sense for us to try to address eutrophication in the core processes if 85% comes from raw materials. So if we want to work on this area, we need to work with our suppliers. We need to work in the supply chain. On the other hand, if you look at abiotic depletion, so how much of fossil fuels are used, it's the opposite. The impact is more concentrated in the core processes. So here it's easier for us if we address with our wet blue suppliers, if we address in our own facilities, we can get easier results just by looking at the core processes. So it's really a way of understanding where the impact is and where we need to address first. Not only that, it gives us also a lot of details about those impacts. This table here, it's only about global warming potential, but for each product we assessed in our research, we got a similar table for each of those 14 indicators. And this gives us not only a view of where the impacts are in terms of the supply chain, the value chain. So if it comes from the raw materials, beam housing, tanning, retaining, finishing, but it also it covers a lot of different impact categories. So raw materials, water consumption, thermal energy, electricity, wastewater. So it's really detailed. And we emphasize here aggregated because these are just the macro categories, but we need to also have in mind that all those categories, they are made up of many other indicators. Just as an example, chemicals, you see two main categories within chemicals, but you have more than 100 chemicals within those categories. So it gives us a really detailed level of information, and we can start looking exactly where those impacts are to see what is more efficient how is more efficient for us to address those impacts. And this is a good example of how we are starting to do it. We can identify hotspots. So what we did here, we removed the raw material side and we start looking at our core processes. And then when we look at the core processes, we can start looking at where the main impacts are. So for example, global warming potential, we could see that 50% or 46% of the impact related to global warming potential comes from chemicals. So this is the first area to address. When you talk about eutrophication, it came from the source of energy, and we can do that evaluation for each of the categories. So this is a very good way of looking to our impacts. And from that, we created improvement indexes because it's a visual way of seeing where we need to look first, what we should prioritize. So don't pay attention too much to the numbers, but it's just a visual way of seeing where we need to work and where we're gonna get better results by addressing those areas. And the next step, after you know where to address first, is to understand how you can do that, what kind of actions you can plan to achieve more efficiencies and to reduce impacts. And these are just some of the examples. We are starting to create improvement hypotheses because by understanding where the impacts are, we create improvement hypotheses that would allow us to address those impacts directly. And then we can start simulating the positive impact or the reduction in the impacts we have by implementing those hypotheses. This is just an exercise in one of the products we evaluated where we can understand, okay, if we implement those hypotheses, what kind of improvements we get. And why do we need to do that? Because then we can cross-reference with our sustainability goals. We can understand if we are going in the right direction, if we should somehow change a little bit our plans. This is just an example. This is our sustainability goals to 2023. So we are talking about reducing amount of water, energy, increasing the amount of renewable energies, work with more sustainable supply chains. So we also address the side the part that is related to this to raw materials. So we can cross both sets of information and see if we are doing in the right direction. So again, I believe this is one of the most important messages here. LCAs are an important way of looking to what you are doing, identifying those impacts and giving you insights of where you can improve them in a easier way. And this is a summary of what I've just said. You start from identifying those areas, those impacts, what you can do in terms of improving, creating actions. You can project what kind of improvements you'd get, enhancements, to see if it makes sense, if it's aligned with your sustainability goals. And after that, you can implement and start measuring your impacts again, and going back in a circular approach. Here, it's we don't need to get into details, but just to give an example of how it helps us to visually see those impacts. We have here global warming potential, and we can have a view where it includes the impact of raw materials, but we can extract that as well and see what are the impacts that are coming only from our core processes, and then we can address the areas that are more important. So this is a good way. It's a ways of creating dashboards that allows you to have more critical evaluations of your impacts. And you can do the same thing for eutrophication, for abiotic depletion, for I went the other way around, for water use, and by doing so, you become more efficient, more precise in making better products, in becoming more sustainable. Other things, LCAs allows you to compare against industry average to see how you're doing, if you got improved. Just some quick examples here. We are able to see that on average, our products are performing 55% better than the industry average in terms of global warming potential, 40% better in terms of abiotic depletion, and 62% better in terms of water usage. You can also look for comparisons against other materials, but the most important part here, you can compare against yourself. LCA, it's a very good opportunity to understand where you can further improve your operations, where you can further gain efficiencies, and by working with that information, we can ensure that we are doing the right things to ensure that the leather is perceived as the right choice as a sustainable material. And that leads us to another quick discussion. Peter was talking about sustainability, the definition of sustainability, and we need to think also what is the definition of a sustainable product. And we start doing some exercises inside to identify the words, the areas that are more connected to sustainability when our customers are having those discussions, when we are having our discussions with our peers, and we starting thinking, sustainability is connected more and more with being able to use more natural products, bio-based products. It's about making the most of byproducts of other industries, so you don't need to rely on new resources, virgin resources. Can we do things that are biodegradable, that will help us to reduce the amount of waste, things that are durable, that carries quality? Can we think about reuse, repair, recycle? For me, working with sustainability, this is one of the areas we need to discuss most. We need to ensure that we are not talking about disposable things, but things that will last and can be repaired. Can we manufacture it responsibly in a transparent way? Peter also mentioned the social part. Are we able to contribute for better social developments? And one of the most important things, how can we contribute to decarbonization of our society? We see that with climate change, one of the main things is to reduce our need for fossil fuels. And when we start crossing that with leather, we see, for example, that leather is one of the products that have the highest content of bio-based carbons. So it's funny that we have to do this kind of measurements, but nowadays everything needs to be backed by research, by testing. And when you test, it's not easy to find materials that comes with a bio-based content as high as leather. When you talk about being a byproduct, as long as there is beef consumption, there will be leather. And does it make sense to if you have that byproduct, to send them to landfills, to not add value to those products? We don't think so. We believe if you have that product available, you got to make the most of it and you got to find ways of transforming it in valuable, durable products that can be used for other purposes. And we are not talking here about hypotheses. We're talking about something that's happening already. In 2019, just as an example, it's estimated that around 17% of the hides generated in the USA went to landfill. So this is a serious topic that we need to be considering. In terms of being biodegradable, leather is biodegradable, is compostable. There are different time frames, different rates of biodegradability. But the good thing here is that there are technologies you can improve that, you can address to make it more biodegradable and more compostable. And you see that leather is being used to make fertilizers, composting, but the industry needs to further develop, move into that direction. Reuse, repair, recycle. I think we don't even need to talk about that. Leather is probably the most suitable material for the footwear, upholstery, fashion industry in terms of durability, in terms of being something that you can repair. And not only that, you see that there are more and more technologies available where you can also recycle leather, which is very important. When you talk about responsibly manufactured, about transparency, the leather industry is one of the industries that has the highest number of initiatives that were created to assess and to report the impacts of that industry in a transparent way. I have listed some examples there, but there are many others. LCA, as I tried to share with you in this presentation, it's also a very good tool that we can use to evaluate our impacts, to report in a more transparent way, but also to look for areas for improvement. But those tools, they need to be used. We as tanneries, as a leather industry, brands, we need to be sure that we are adopting those tools in order to improve that transparency. Social development, I'm not even covering the leather aspect, but if you think only about livestock production, we have that more than 1.5 billion people globally that relies on livestock production. Then you add the millions of people involved in leather processing. So there is a lot of space here to improve, to support social development. It's a matter of doing the things right and ensuring that we are promoting that development. And the last point here, decarbonization, with all these discussions about climate change, and we need to understand how we can use less fossil fuels. And I believe we need to look at this point in a more holistic way. There isn't one single answer, but you have a set of materials that you can use to reduce the amount of plastic, to reduce the amount of synthetic materials made from fossil fuels. So if you put leather, cotton, wool, jute, all the new bio-based materials being made with byproducts of the food industry, mushrooms, all these things, they have an important role. And the role is to replace plastic and to replace the fossil-based products. But that needs to be made in a transparent way. You shouldn't try to claim sustainability by claiming also the performance of other products. These are just some results of an article that has been published in a scientific journal, where it compared leather with all the alternative materials that are claiming to be an alternative to leather. And when you see none of them have the attributes, the performance that is comparable to leather. Maybe they have one of the performances, but they don't deliver the same package. So we need to be transparent also in the way we communicate to our customers, to the market, about the products we use. You cannot sell a table made of wood and a table of made of plastic and try to compare it. The qualities are different, the performance is different, and you cannot compare it in terms of performance, but also in terms of footprint. So here is just a call for us to, as a group, to try to create more transparency in that area. And to finish here, I have just gone over my 25 minutes. it's important to understand that LCA is not the end, but it's the beginning of a continuous approach aiming at adopting more scientific-based evidence to manage our impact. At PRIMEASIA, we've made a decision that we're going to be reviewing our LCA results every year, so we can understand how our performance, how our operations are helping us to achieve our sustainability goals. We are going through a third-party review right now for our LCA, so we can add further transparency. And we are starting to share also our LCA results in a more detailed way with our customers, with partners in industry-wide discussions, and also with HIG Index, so that information can be used and can support those discussions in a more transparent way. So thank you very much. I know this topic sometimes it can be a bit complicated, but I would be happy to answer any questions. And not only myself, I think now we're gonna open a panel here for everybody in case you have any questions related to the other presentations. Thanks once again for your time.
Thank you very much, Fernando. That was a very interesting and comprehensive presentation. Some really great information there, and a significant piece of work that's been undertaken by PRIMEASIA. I think there are some questions there, mostly for you. So I think, Georgina, if you could perhaps go through some of the questions, and for Fernando initially, I think, and then we can answer a few for Peter as well. But there's mostly, I think, for Fernando.
Yeah, it's no problem. So Fernando, we have a question here that is asking which allocation percentage is assigned to the leather in the raw material part of your LCA?
That's actually a very interesting question, Georgina. And before answering that, I think it brings up another important topic on LCA. A lot of times when you use generic information and you use assumptions, you start having numbers that doesn't reflect their reality. So what we did here, by the fact we mapped the supply chain, we worked directly with the slaughterhouses that we normally work with, we are able to extract the exact economic allocation of our materials and the mass fraction that those materials represent in relation to the total mass fraction of the animals. So this follows the rules set on the ISO standards, on the PEFCRs. So we are able to collect the economic and the mass fraction portion of our material, so we could allocate that to leather.
Great, thank you. Another question, Fernando, asking how can you compare your LCA data with the average of the worldwide tanning industry data?
How we can compare? I don't understand exactly what you mean of how we can compare. But I would say, first of all, I think that there are two things we need to answer in relation to that question. One is that we need to try to understand that LCA is more than comparing to your peers. You should use that to compare to yourself, so you can become a better company. Now, how you can compare to other companies, you gotta use public available data or industry benchmarks. In our case, we compared with the baselines available at the HIG Index. I hope this is what has been asked.
Yeah, there's a couple of similar questions, but I think essentially people are trying to establish around benchmarking different LCAs that different tanneries might have done, and how that's possible if they have different KPIs or indicators. We also have a question asking whether you think that an LCA is going to become a requirement for wet blue suppliers.
I think it's hard to say that, and I think at this point in time it's a bit premature. what I can say related to that is LCA will become a more popular tool to measure environmental impact, and I hope more companies start to adopt. At PRIMEASIA, what we believe is that if we have more companies in the leather industry adopting LCAs, we're going to have better data to engage in discussions about sustainability in leather. So I don't know if it's going to become a requirement. I think at this point, it's not we don't see that for PRIMEASIA, but we hope that more and more tanneries, including wet blue tanneries, start working on that. And just sorry to go further on that, it's not a requirement to run an LCA, but it helps us also to assess our suppliers and our partners in terms of environmental efficiency.
Great, thank you. And I think just one more question I want to ask to you, Fernando. Do you have a plan to offset the CO2 emissions of the farm? I wouldn't say offset, but we can improve. We can both improve those emissions or reduce those emissions, and we can measure them more accurately. And what we do, we have a project which is called Responsibly Raised, in which we are working with initiatives in different areas of the world, where we are looking for companies that have best environmental practices, that are looking to better pasture management, animal welfare, which will result consequently in lower emissions and sometimes even in sequestration of carbon. What we gotta do as an industry, we need to start also measuring those benefits in terms of sequestration, lower emissions, so we can have more qualified discussions around those improvements. Great, thank you. Peter, I have a question for you, asking with the supply chain mapping tool, you obviously talked a lot about mapping of the leather supply chain, but can it be used for other materials such as textile and hardware?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, we're talking today predominantly about leather as material, but all materials would benefit from greater traceability. And our tool absolutely can be applied to multiple different materials. I mean, right now we are mapping for clients textile, particularly cotton supply chains, metal hardware, rubber, timber. So the process is essentially the same for every material. We do modify the questionnaire part of it, so we ensure that the questions are relevant to the particular material, and also we can target those questions to ensure that they're capturing the unique challenges that different materials have, because different materials obviously have their own unique, different environmental and social challenges. But yes, certainly we use that. We are currently using the system for multiple different materials, and some of our clients are using us to understand multiple different materials within their full range. So yes, absolutely.
Great, thank you. And we have a question, which I'm not sure who wants to take this, which is asking how we can consider leather being more sustainable in terms of biodegradability. That is something we're going to come on to in one of the later webinar sessions in the series, but I didn't know if anybody wanted to just give some initial thoughts on that topic. I can. First, when you talk about alternative materials, you have many, so it's hard to generalize that answer. When you talk about synthetics and plastic, then it's for sure more biodegradable. That there's no comparison on that. And what is interesting about leather is that even though different retainages will have different levels of biodegradability, you have technologies, you have solutions to make that material more biodegradable. While with plastic, it's a bit more complicated. Great, thank you. I'm just looking through to see if there's any other questions we haven't answered. But I think...
Georgina, the question about the lifespan of leather, I mean, Fernando touched on it, but I think there's a question of whether that was incorporated into the LCA or not. I think it's a good question.
Yeah, it says, does the lifespan of a leather product manufactured make a part of the LCA of the corresponding leather? So it's talking about the actual product.
As I mentioned here, it has not, and it's an area that we'll for sure look in the future. But to include that, we'll have to partner also with our customers. But the LCA covered what we call from cradle to gate, so to the end of our processing. But if we do it, it's even more interesting, because you can start talking about carbon foot or kilos of CO2 equivalent per a unit of measure of durability. Then leather would look even more sustainable.
Thank you. Is there any other questions coming through? I think. No, I think we've answered all the questions. There's some duplicate questions coming through, but any closing thoughts from any of the presenters today?
Yes, just a closing thought. Peter, go on. Yeah.
No, I was just going to say that I think that these topics are highly relevant for these materials right now, and I think that we focused on leather a lot today and asking the question, can leather be a sustainable material? Well, I think the answer is absolutely yes. By taking the approaches that some of the things we've been discussing today is absolutely a way that you can confidently use leather going forward as a sustainable material within a mix of the materials available out there.
Yeah, and from my perspective, I was just going to pull the two presentations together, really, and that one of Peter's comments in his was, if you want to create authentic messaging, then you really need to understand the science and the facts. And what PRIMEASIA has done there is they've gathered together the science, the facts, and the metrics, which enables them to talk confidently about what they're doing and have the metrics and detail behind their messaging, and therefore they are able to create authentic messages around the products that they're producing. And I think really I would encourage all suppliers and brands that to make claims, you really need to understand the metrics thoroughly to be able to make authentic messages. So that's really a closing comment. But on top of that, I'd really like to thank Fernando for presenting today as a keynote speaker. Great piece of work that PRIMEASIA's done. Again, PRIMEASIA at the front of, at the cutting edge of doing initiatives, positive initiatives, and that's certainly LCAs for a tannery. There are some that have done it, but very, very few. I think that's probably one of the biggest pieces of work, as you mentioned in your presentation. And thank you again to Peter for doing that, and thank you for my team putting it together. And thank you very much for those that have spent the time to listen to the presenters, and hopefully you'll tune in for the other seminars that are coming up in the next quarter. But thanks very much for your time today. Appreciate it all, presenters and participants. Thank you very much. We'll close the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.